This is the Business of Apps podcast, bringing you actionable insights from the leaders of the global app industry and the world's fastest growing apps. You can find more app news, data and analysis over at businessofapps.com.
Welcome to the Business of Apps podcast. On this show, we invite app industry professionals to cover various topics. We promise to do our best to keep it both insightful but brief. In this episode, we have Loren Gould, Marketing Director at Cuvva. Loren, welcome to the Business of Apps podcast.
Hey, how are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Doing great. Well, as great as you can do during COVID-19 pandemic. Today, a lot of businesses around the globe are going through pretty much the same process, the process of adaptation to the new economy influenced by COVID-19. And we believe one of the best ways to help people to cope with it is to share other businesses' experiences. And this is why in this episode we have Loren from Cuvva to tell us about how his company manages this crisis. Let's begin with something else. Loren, tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm originally from a marketing agency background and have experience in a multitude of agencies working across a whole variety of stuff. So I worked on a lot of Nokia's launches back in the day and subsequently watched them, and including their switch to Windows Phone and subsequently their demise from the phone market. Also did a bit of stuff for Barclaycard, and I did a lot of stuff for premium vodka brands. And then I eventually realized that I really disliked working for clients, and a couple friends and myself at the time were working on an idea which was Double, which is a business that I founded, which was essentially it was a Tinder for double dates. It was a dating app. The whole idea was that it would be there's a lot of pressure for you to perform when you're on your own, be it in a live chat or on a date. And the whole idea of Double would be that it was more fun, less awkward, and safer. And people would naturally just be more themselves because they would have the support of a friend who would come along, who would be both in the chat and come along on the date. We did that for about 2 years. Spoiler, it did not work out in the end. Dating industry is very difficult to make money in, and it was one of these things where it was just, there was no real path to, it was a good idea and it was a very easy sell, but there was no long-term business model there. So, and had to shut that down, which was, an experience in itself. And I think if anybody has the unfortunate ability to do that, you'll learn a lot from that process. And then I was looking for my next thing, and that's when Cuvva came along. Never thought in a million years I would be working in insurance, let alone really enjoying it and passionate about it. But I am one of those people now, and I've been at Cuvva for just under 4 years now.
Awesome, pretty diverse path, I should say, from Nokia to vodka brand to dating and now insurance. You take really different angles on this life and different perspectives. You never know what your next endeavor will be. That's for sure.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think one of the benefits is, if you can, is working in an agency is really, really tough, and it's usually lowly paid, pretty poor pay. But you do get experience into exposures, a lot of different varying clients, and who are all operating in very different things, and so you can actually learn a lot from doing that. So it is a very useful experience to go through.
Right. Loren, I can tell you firsthand experience. I used to work for a digital marketing agency as well, so I know exactly what you're saying. That's totally understand what you mean. Now, let's talk about Cuvva. Can you give us a quick intro what the company does?
Sure. So we are a UK-based insurance startup, currently focusing on motor insurance, and our main product is one that is it's called short-term insurance for people that aren't familiar with the UK insurance market. Essentially, unlike most countries where they insure the car, not the driver, over here you in the UK you insure the driver on a specific car, the car. So you can't someone else just can't jump in and borrow that car from you. So like lending your car to someone is like a very tricky process that often involves either the owner ringing up the insurer, and you have this very awkward situation where you are speaking to your insurance company, and then the person who wants to borrow your car is telling them the details that they need to get to the insurer, but the insurer doesn't want to speak to them because they don't have access to your account. And the whole thing's just like very cumbersome, and oftentimes they won't be able to quote you, or like the minimum you can buy is like a 3 to 6 months worth of cover. Then you have a third party option, which is what we do. Before we came along, it was a very niche industry and just very, very, very poorly sold. So, I mean, if you think insurance is antiquated in general, the short-term incumbents are like even more basic. So, again, it's just like there's a very cumbersome process. You always have to, even if you want to borrow it for an hour, the minimum you could buy for a day. They would forget all your details because in the world of insurance, no one really has figured out a way to create an account because they're just very technologically backwards. So it's just not very quick and easy to use. So we come along. Our founder, Freddie, had the idea. He was like, well, because he was faced with this problem where he was constantly trying to get coverage on other people's car. And he was like, it would just be why can't I just get insured on a car, like getting an Uber or ordering a Deliveroo, where I just open an app on my phone, and I'm insured very quickly. And he was like, actually, that's a really good idea. And he looked into it, and the idea was Cuvva was born. And essentially what we do is we allow anyone to just quickly download our app, and they set up an account, remember all your details. So we have a policy of we only ask a question once and only once. So there's none of this like constantly re-entering information, and you can get insured anywhere from an hour up to 28 days. And once you have to set up an account, which takes 2 minutes, then after that it takes you less than 30 seconds to get insured. And the whole idea is that it should be quick, easy, and hassle-free. And, it's rather than you having to work around the insurer, our whole ethos is that we work around the customer, because for far too long, customers have been ignored and bullied by the insurers, when in fact, they're the ones paying the money and keeping the insurers in business. And it should be the other way around. And the insurers should be like a very customer-focused industry. So that's what we do. And we're currently in the process of building out an annual motor equivalent. So that's like the standard car insurance policy you would buy in your own car, which we're hoping to launch in the next month or so.
I see. Cool. Let's talk about now as cool part of today's reality. How do you navigate COVID-19 situation right now? How the company was affected by the whole thing?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. Basically, our app is based on movement, so we've obviously taken a hit, although not as much as we anticipated, which we're quite lucky about it. I think we're in a very fortunate position where insurance is a necessity good, and then a lot of the government legislation has actually kind of worked in our favor to some extent, whereby there's been like a massive focus on getting people off of public transport, but then people still need to get to work. So then they end up, coming to alternatives like us and, borrowing someone else's car to make that journey that they would otherwise make on public transport. And I think kind of what I would say that we've done quite well in this pandemic is that we took action quite early, and we were, I think, about quite measured. So we looked at, what is a potential good scenario, what is like a worst case scenario, and then we made decisions on what we figured out would kind of be like the situation in between, and we've been pretty on top of that. And I think for us in the long term, this is actually going to play out very well, because I think it's forced us to become a lot more focused in what we do, and a lot more, and also it opens up people's eyes to kind of like the wider world around them. An example would be a lot of people think, including myself, thought that they couldn't possibly work from home, and it just wasn't a conceivable option. Whereas like now, having to go through that, I actually realize that it's it is a pretty manageable solution. And I think the same thing in terms of like how people travel, how people get from point A to point B. There a lot more people are considering about now that they have been forced to, about looking at different various options about how they can actually do that beyond what they did pre-COVID-19.
So your business goes twofold: temporary car insurance and travel insurance. I wonder, do you still see any demand for travel insurance, or basically 1-0?
No, in travel insurance is the one that was only making up a relatively, in comparison, it's a new product, so like a small amount of our sales, and we took the decision along with our insurer to turn that off, because otherwise you get into like these kind of situations where you are people are taking out policies and it's not clear whether or not the insurer is going to pay out. Like even insurers that have the absolutely the best intentions, they, at the end of the day, it's a business. And if something like this happens and, not only are you getting people who have medical bills, but then you're paying for flight cancellations and, it's getting very difficult to get people from point A to point B, when otherwise it would just be as simple as like, oh, we'll just put them on the next flight or we'll just put them in a hotel. But now there's no flights, there's no hotels to be booked. It becomes very difficult. So we, again, relatively early on, decision was made to turn that product off for until we get more back to normal.
I see. It totally makes sense. Now let's talk about marketing. So, what marketing techniques do you find helpful for your business now? What works?
What works is we have really ramped up the amount of user research that we do, because basically it was business as usual. And then this whole thing out, and suddenly it's like everything that gets kind of thrown out the window. And we have to figure out, it's like, okay, so, what messaging now works in this new environment, and like how do we need to change our approach to advertising, and what messages are those customers going to respond to? What the customers that we're getting into now, how are they different from the customers that we're getting into before, and what changes are we making, and how do we get them to respond? And that's meant that we've had to change the type of creatives we're running and type of messaging that we're putting out, and then also testing out new channels as well. I'm like I'm always a glass half full type of character. And I always see that, in times of volatility, there's real opportunity there. And I think one of the things that we have is that we're much more focused on our test and learn approach. And we've really managed to scale that up out of force very quickly. And I think we're definitely reaping the benefits of it. And then it's just about looking at where do we think our customers are at the moment. So is it we're just about to start trialing a new campaign on the neighborhood network next door to see if that works, because there seems to be a sense where you've got a lot of people at home, you know that everyone's at home, that their cars are parked on the street, and then there's going to be like those cars are only going to be owned by some people living in that neighborhood. So what if you could create a situation where the people are on there, and then you can start advertising a need where it's like people can borrow other people's cars, and then you just push this message of like how to use that responsibly.
Great. And so go ahead.
No, that's it.
Yeah, so that's awesome. So, and in terms of specific channels, it's all over the place: social media, marketing, website optimization, etc.
Yeah. So it is, in terms of what we had scheduled to be running live right now and what we actually have right now, that's had to shift. So there was going to be a big focus this year about testing out new traditional channels. So we had a big radio campaign that was scheduled. We were seriously considering about going onto TV. That radio campaign's been pushed out. We've decided against going onto TV. And then it's just about figuring out how people are spending their time. So again, back to the next door example, we were having provisional conversations with them, but then we're like, I bet engagement on that's gone up quite dramatically. And indeed it has. So it's like, okay, it definitely makes sense to work on that. And then the same thing, we're now testing out TikTok as well, because our user base is quite young. So Snapchat is like a channel that works out extremely well for us. So, and now we're trying out TikTok because there's a lot of engagement on that app right now. So it makes sense that, it would be a relevant fit for our demographic. So we'll give that a go.
All right, I see. So what if we compare this year and the last year? Can you recall what was the most effective marketing channel? What was the effective marketing step you took back in 2018 that you saw the biggest positive outcome from? And what about this year? Can you name something that is working right now, like as of this May?
Sure. So I think our two big wins for 2019 were, one of them's a bit boring, which is Google AdWords, PPC. We finally managed to get that to work for us, and we were able to scale that very successfully, and that worked quite well. It's obviously quite difficult. Attribution-wise, it's quite difficult to run a web-based PPC campaigns because a lot of because it's insurance, people want to go to the website first before they download the app, because it's just an app's a very brand new idea in the world of insurance. So we've got to take these people on this very convoluted journey where they go to the website first and then they download the app. And that's been very difficult to connect up. We finally figured out how to do that last year, and we've seen a lot of success with that. And then more interestingly, although a little bit less glamorous, is in motorway service stations where you go to, fill up with petrol and, take a break from driving, advertising in the urinals there. And that's basically, there was an idea where it's like, well, the product really works best when you have someone who is has immediate access to a car. And we're like, well, we know these places, the only way you can get there is via a car. So let's give that a go. And that's just been very, very successful. And the major problem with that is that there's just not enough scale. That channel doesn't really scale as much as something like a Facebook or a Google AdWords would do. So we're kind of maxing out at that moment, but it's just like these traditional channels that you would kind of you wouldn't think would be worth doing, sometimes are, and can be very effective. As for 2020, I think our biggest success would be, and this isn't a specific channel, it's more of basically making sure that we're constantly testing and learning, and we have like a really strong feedback loop with the user research team at the company. Because otherwise, we're kind of just making assumptions of what we think will work and won't work, and you'll ultimately get into a situation where perhaps some of the creatives that you're running, whilst they are, it's just very much business as usual, and the whole process gets a little bit stale. And it's about let's figure out ways where we can understand what the user wants, and then figure out cheaply and efficiently how we test that. And also then it's also about stuff that we think might work, and perhaps is like a little bit outside of the box, and seeing if that works as well. And it's like making sure that you have the right balance between the two.
I see. Now, what you can tell at brands in general, like companies who find themselves hit the hardest by this pandemic, people who have a hard time to see what actually they should do right now, when in fact demand on their apps has dropped dramatically. What would you suggest to these people?
So I think it's about, as I said before, I think in times of volatility, there's real opportunity there. And I think it's about making sure that you're in communication with your users and figuring out what they want to do. I mean, so I think you have the situation in the travel industry, where that whole business is like pretty much disappeared overnight. But then you also have, on the other hand, you have a situation where people are at home and bored and wishing that they could, go out and explore. So it's just like, there is definitely, my feeling is that in an industry like that, you might not be selling a lot, but there is like a real content opportunity there, where you're like, focusing more on building up content and educating people about the places that they want to go when hopefully things do resume as normal. And then you can either figure out a way to monetize that, or you become like front of line when they actually go and booking that trip, and they do it with you rather than, whoever comes up on Google first.
Think in advance, think out of the box, think long-term about the time when things will resume to normal, as you're saying. That's a good advice. Now I have a few so-called quick rapid-fire questions for you specifically. So here we go. Are you iOS or Android person?
iOS.
Okay, I'm ticking off one more tick box, because I'm asking this question to every guest, and so far iOS is number one. Do you remember your first mobile phone?
I do. I had to actually look it up, but it was an Ericsson T28. So from this shows my age. But it was. I got it when I was 13, and it had this very cool feature where you would push a button on the side, and the phone would flip down, and that's how you would take a call. Wow!
What a feature! Yeah. No, it may get back at some point in the future. What is your favorite app now?
My favorite app now, I think that's a great question. I think it's probably going to be Pre-COVID-19, it would be like Citymapper. I think they do a really good job at understanding their product and who their marketing is, and who their customer is, and how they market to them effectively. And the same thing for probably my favorite app at the moment is Waze. So we'll continue on to the navigation theme. And I think because those are two apps where in a sea of there's like a ton of apps, especially ones by Apple and Google, that do all exactly the same thing, and they create their own little quite large niche for themselves, just by really leaning into something and making sure that they do it very well, rather than an Apple or a Google which tries to do everything and it's a little bit half-hearted. And they're just very good. It's like you would never use Citymapper to get driving directions, and you would never use Waze to navigate on public transport. But it's like they have this ability to stay front of mind when you want. So if I want to go to point A to point B on public transport, Citymapper is the first point of call. And even though I can get that through Apple Maps or Google, and then like whenever I'm driving, I'll immediately use Waze, even though I can do that through get the exact same functionality through Google Maps and Apple Maps. So, and I think there was a lot to say about trying to focus on one specific thing rather than trying to do everything.
I see. I love Waze too. That's one of my favorite apps too, in fact. Now, it's kind of the opposite question. What about the overrated app? An app you can hear about, but to be honest, I don't think this app deserves all this hype about. Is there any app like this for you?
Yeah, so I think with this, I don't know if you remember, there was an app called Yo about 4 years ago, and essentially it started out as a gimmick. It was an app, you download it, and you could just yo someone. So there would be a contacts, and you could just send them a yo, and that was it. And it went viral, and they were at like the peak of like Silicon Valley's social network investing, and they raised 10 million and ultimately went on to do nothing. And I've always just been amazed at, the founder must have been a fantastic salesman to be able to get that over.
Exactly.
It's just great how they could raise so much money on an app that just basically did nothing.
The crazy world of venture capital.
I know, exactly.
Yeah, let's just talk a bit about future. Are there any app technologies you're most excited about? Are you waiting for some app tech that is on the horizon?
So in terms of like specific app tech, I'm quite excited for, like, Apple has hinted that they are doing instant apps like on Google, where you can, the user can interact with a portion of the app before having to download it. I think that will be very, very cool. And more broadly, the one I'm quite excited about is the wearables and smart home technology markets. I'm a relatively adopter. I just got an Apple Watch at Christmas. I absolutely love it. I think it's great. Sure, there's security concerns. I'm sending all my data to Apple, but I'm going to assume that it's fully anonymized and trust them. But I think that's going to be a big field, and you're going to have people are just going to want to know more and more about how their bodies are performing, and be looking to wearables to deliver that. And then in terms of smart home technology, I think there's a lot of this is very overhyped, and I don't think the technology is really there yet and implemented in the way that it could currently work. So I think a classic example of like the Hue lights, great idea. It's a really cool gadget, but it's like, why would you replace all the lights in your house when you actually just need to replace the light switch to turn them off and on? It makes no sense to do it that way. So I think and then there's like there needs to be a lot of more consolidation there to get like a suite that actually works well together. But those are the ones I'm most interested in at the moment.
I see. Great. Now, before I let you go, how can people get to know more about what Cuvva does?
Sure. Well, you can listen to this podcast, and then you can download our app through the App Store or Play Store, or you can go to www.cuvva.com.
That's great. Thanks a lot for your time and coming on our podcast, Loren. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Bye-bye. And that was Loren Gould, Marketing Director at Cuvva. To listen to more episodes, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. Just search for Business of Apps and you will find us easily. Once you subscribe, you'll be able to get new episodes on your smartphone, tablet, or computer as soon as we release them. And please don't forget to leave us a review and comment. It is highly appreciated. And also, remember, all episodes will be available on businessofapps.com as well. Till the next time, bye.
This is the Business of Apps podcast, bringing you actionable insights from the leaders of the global app industry and the world's fastest growing apps. You can find more app news, data and analysis over at businessofapps.com. Thank you for listening to the Business of Apps podcast. For more, head on over to businessofapps.com.